last winter, some friends and I went up north for a weekend ski trip. There were 7 of us total, 4 guys, 3 girls, including myself. We were all in our late 20s and have been close friends since junior high. My friend Jordy's family has a cabin that we all stayed at. Jordy's a great host. He's all about giving you the full experience, making sure you have a great time, and he always wants to show you everything the area has to offer. On Saturday, we hit the slopes during the day, and later that night he wanted to show us the nightlife. This meant checking out the 3 bars in the area. It's a small town and there's not a lot of action during the winter. We ate dinner at the first spot, and then moved on to the second. The guys were talking about this place all day, saying that we were in for a real treat. When we pulled up to the place, I knew right away that they were joking. It looked pretty bad. It was a really old building and the paint was chipping off and stuff. I guess it was an old lodge built in the early 1900s when logging was a big industry. The bar is on the main floor, and apparently there are a bunch of apartments upstairs that people rented out. We walked in and the place was dead. It was a giant space that looks like it hasn't changed at all in decades. For the first couple minutes, it seemed pretty funny. It was a huge waterfront property that seemed completely out of place next to all of these $1-million houses. People spend a lot of money to have homes or cabins on this river. But within just a few minutes, I began to feel more and more uncomfortable. It's hard to explain, but I couldn't help but feel this overwhelming sense of dread. There was a really negative energy in there, almost as if there was some demonic presence. The whole place was really dark. There was a DJ in the corner, but it was just some old guy that sort of looked like Elvis. The music he was playing was off of old karaoke CDs. They're really weird to listen to if no one is singing along. You would recognize the songs, but the vocals would be missing, except for some echoey backing vocals during the choruses and stuff. No one was singing along, but once in a while the guy would quietly mumble into the microphone. This alone was enough to have me feeling weird, but I kept feeling more and more unsettled the longer we stayed. Aside from us, there were 2 men sitting at a booth in the back corner. I was really hoping we weren't staying long, but a couple of our guys started playing a game of pool. As I talked to my friends, I kept noticing that the 2 men kept looking over at us girls. There was something really creepy about them. I started to ask if anyone else was feeling a bad vibe in there, but no one seemed to notice. That wasn't too surprising since they seemed more buzzed than I was. The 2 guys in the corner were pretty much just staring at us by now with no regard for how obvious it was. I just wanted to get out of there. I was trying to avoid it, but I really had to pee, so I asked one of the girls to go to the bathroom with me. The bathrooms were through a hallway in the back. We had to sort of walk past the 2 guys to get back there. I could feel their eyes on us the entire time we walked, and I noticed one of the men stood up right as we got around the corner. The hallway had some other doors, and it also connected to a staircase that must have went to the upstairs apartments. The bathroom was exactly what I expected based on the condition of everything else. The floor and walls were all beat up. I went into the corner stall while my friend used another. We were talking as I put a bunch of toilet paper down on the seat. I thought I heard a faint thud, but it was really hard to tell since we were talking. I sat down and was looking straight at the stall door, and then I felt like I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was so subtle that I didn't know what it was, or if it was anything. I was actually thinking that there was something so off about this place that it was probably all in my head. I looked around at the wall on my left for a few moments. The tile floor extended about halfway up the wall. Many of the tiles were cracked or broken. I kept scanning until I about jumped out of my skin when I saw it. Just inside the stall door, a couple feet above the floor, there was a tile with a broken corner. I could just barely see an eyeball looking back at me through a hole in the wall. I screamed in horror as I jumped up trying to cover myself. As I screamed, the hole in the wall went black. I started to completely freak out as my friend was yelling, asking me what was wrong. I felt like I was having a panic attack as I tried to say the words, "Someone's watching me." I scrambled to pull myself together, and we ran out of the bathroom and back to our friends. I was bawling as we tried to tell the guys why we needed to leave right now. The two creepy men that had been staring at us were gone, and I felt like that wasn't a coincidence. A couple of our guy friends started raging and yelling, saying that they wanted to beat the crap out of those guys. They were running around screaming, trying to find them. It was chaos. The bartender and the cook were trying to figure out what was going on. It wasn't going very well, though. I don't know why, but the cook was getting into it with one of the guys now. It just seemed like the whole thing was getting way out of control. One of the guys took us girls out to the car and tried to calm us down while the other three stayed inside. I know that the guys can get pretty fired up, and it didn't take too long for the cops to show up, but I don't really know who called. They gathered some information from us and said they were going to look into it. I got the impression that they didn't really believe me, and I doubt anything ever happened. I didn't want anything to do with that place ever again, so I didn't bother to follow up afterwards. All I can say is that if you ever have a bad feeling like that, don't ignore it. Just get out of there. My mom's side of the family is very close, especially the women. My mom is one of 5 sisters, so girls' night with the sisters and daughters is at least a weekly event, if not more. I had recently turned 21 and I was excited to be able to join the fun if they went to the bar, as they like to do once in a while. Most of the family lived about 15 miles away, and I met a couple of my aunts and my cousin at a bar up there one Thursday night. We enjoyed some food and stayed for a couple drinks afterwards. We just sat and talked, had a lot of laughs, and played a little Keno. A little after midnight, I decided to call it a night since I had a further drive than the others. I headed back to my parents' house, which is where I stayed when I was home from college. My parents live in a quiet subdivision. It's basically a big square, and on each end, the road continues a little bit before it dead ends. Our house is on one of the dead ends. It's a little darker at night, and there are a lot of trees and bushes in the area. The porch light illuminates the driveway pretty well, but the light gets blocked on the right side due to an exterior wall. I always parked my car on the road in front of the house, where it was pretty dark. I was always a little uncomfortable coming home at night, thinking that someone could easily be hiding in the darkness or something. Maybe that was just me being paranoid. I pulled up and parked my car and started walking quickly towards the door. I had my keys ready and started turning the deadbolt almost as soon as I reached it. As I opened the door and stepped inside, I was startled by the sound of fast footsteps moving across the driveway. Although at the time, I wasn't fully aware of what I was hearing. I just knew that the sound made me jump and slam the door shut as quickly as I could. As soon as I turned the deadbolt, a man appeared through the window of the door. He was frantically pounding on the door, screaming, "Let me in! Let me in!" He was wearing dark clothing and had a hood up. I was absolutely terrified. I didn't really get a good look at him. I just took off running. I reached the kitchen and sort of froze for a moment. Within a few seconds, I heard frantic pounding on the dining room window and the same man screaming to let him in. The entire backyard is enclosed with a wooden privacy fence. On the side of the house where the dining room is, there's no gate, so the man had to have jumped the fence. By this time, I was screaming too and almost paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what to do and couldn't make any sense of it. If the man actually needed help for some reason, why was he at our house? We were less than a quarter mile from a main road with several gas stations and even a state police post just up the road. It all happened so fast, but it didn't take long for my dad to come running down the hall in his tighty-whities, demanding to know what was going on. I tried to tell him the best I could, but I'm sure I was hysterical. He made sure I was all right and then opened the back patio door just enough to yell that the cops were on their way. He called them and reported it after. They showed up a little while later and looked around the yard, but they didn't find anything. I feel lucky that I made it to the door when I did. Even just a second slower, he would have got to me, and I don't want to know what he was planning. When I was a kid, I grew up in the township just outside the city. It was quiet in this area, being it's mostly residential. I lived in one of 4 neighborhoods that were close together, and there was a main road that ran between them. I had 2 friends that I was really close with. We would hang out all the time and usually sleep over at each other's houses on weekends and a lot during the summer. We were in middle school and we started getting a little rebellious. We would sneak out of the house late at night and go exploring and stuff. Nothing too crazy, but when you're that young, there's something really exciting about just being out in the middle of the night when you're not supposed to. For as long as I can remember, there was a strange house on the corner of the main road. It was maybe a quarter-mile away from the neighborhoods, but you'd pass it all the time. It definitely stood out compared to all the other houses in the area. It was always in disrepair and looked cobbled together. The thing that stuck out to me was that there was no women or children there ever. It just looked like there were 8 or 10 grown men that lived there. The house was small, so I don't think it was apartments or anything. I don't think it was a family either. You would see the men outside when you drove by, and they're always different races and ages. Either way, our parents always told us to stay away from that house and not to talk to anyone who lived there. They never really gave us a reason. If we asked why, they would say, "Just do it," or "because I said so." This only increased the curiosity in my adolescent mind, but we listened. We had no reason to go near there anyways. One night during the summer, my friends Troy and Paul stayed over at my house. Our home base was in the basement where we hung out and played video games. It was pretty much a given at this point that we'd sneak out after my parents went to sleep, which is what we did. It was around 2 in the morning and we were just walking around the neighborhoods. It was really quiet and it was uncommon to see anyone walking around in the area after dark, even on the busier roads. We were making our way through one of the subdivisions and we turned the corner heading towards the main road. But after a minute, Troy stopped us and whispered, "Shut up." We all stopped and he pointed up ahead. Up at the main road, there was a man standing in the middle of the street. He was just standing there frozen, staring directly up at the street light. We stood there, confused and asking ourselves what he was doing. It was surprising to see anyone at all, but even more unusual to see someone just staring at the light like that. We watched him for what seemed like an entire minute and he didn't move at all. Paul asked if he was talking to himself. He said, "Listen, do you hear that?" But we didn't hear anything. He waved us to follow as he started slowly inching towards him in a stealthy fashion. Troy and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. We didn't want to go any closer, though I didn't want to be called a wuss either, so we reluctantly followed. It seemed like we were out of view, and we made it maybe 10 feet. All of a sudden, the man's head quickly turned in our direction. It was abrupt, like he knew we were there the whole time. We stopped and stood there for a few seconds as the man just stared back. You couldn't clearly see his face. We were getting freaked out and one of us whispered, "Dude, let's go." We turned around and started walking slowly at first, trying not to make it obvious. We heard the man softly say, "Hey," and that's when we all bolted. I looked back and saw the man chasing after us. We started running down the street and cut through some yards until we reached a small woodsy area near the front of the neighborhood. We had to make it across the main road to get back to my house, which was still a little ways away. The man wasn't behind us anymore, so we stopped and ducked down behind some trees trying to catch our breath. None of us knew how long he tried to chase us or where he went. We didn't know what to do. We were scared out of our minds and didn't have phones or anything at the time. We sat there quietly looking around and just listening, trying to figure out if it was safe to move. We waited probably a good 15 or 20 minutes before we agreed we had to try to make it back to my house. We devised a plan that we would creep towards the main road, and when we got closer, we'd sprint across and then run through the yards to try to stay hidden until we got back to my house. We slowly moved through the shadows until we reached the point where the trees ended, and we stopped for a second. That's when Paul said, "All right, on 3, let's go." We got ready as he started the count. 1, 2, 3. We took off racing towards the road. There was a landscaped area on the other side where my neighborhood started. As we made it to the grass, all of a sudden the man popped out of the bushes and was running at us. He was super close, but I was able to slip him, and so did Paul. We were running for our lives until I heard Troy screaming for help behind me. I looked back in absolute terror when I saw that the man had him pinned to the ground. The man was trying to cover Troy's mouth, but you could hear momentary screams as he struggled to hold him down. I yelled to Paul that we had to go help him. We ran back and were pleading with the man to let him go. Troy continued to try to wiggle his way out from under. Not knowing what to do, I just started to scream for help, hoping that someone would hear us. Moments later, I saw one of the sweetest things I'd ever seen. A pair of headlights heading towards us on the main road about a mile away. The man noticed them too as he looked up for a split second. That's when I realized I'd seen him before. He was one of the men that lived down at the house that our parents always told us to stay away from. He looked at us with this really awkward smile and then softly said, "Maybe next time." He stood up and took off running down the road. Troy got up and we took off in the opposite direction back to my house. I don't think I'd ever been more scared in my entire life. I never noticed that man again whenever I passed the house. A few years later, a few of us were hanging out at Paul's and we were exploring the web. This was around the time when the internet was becoming popular, but still pretty basic, long before social media. Somehow we came across a site where you could look up public police records and stuff. We were having fun looking up people we knew and seeing if they had any criminal history. Then we found a site that showed us where a certain type of registered offender lived on the map. There wasn't much nearby, except for the house on the corner. There were multiple people on the list who apparently lived there. That must have been why our parents always told us to stay away.